Hi, I'm Annemarie with Speak Confident English, and welcome to your Confident English Wednesday lesson. Earlier this year, I shared with you a lesson on using to me versus for me, and we focused on sentences where you could use both. Both to me or for me could be correct in the sentence, but there might be a slight difference in the meaning. Today, I want to take that topic of the prepositions to and for one step further, and we're going to focus on situations when only one of those prepositions is possible. In other words, you have to make a choice, and that's really frustrating and hard to do while you're speaking if you're not sure and you don't want to suddenly get stuck or frozen in the middle of a conversation. Now, before we really dive in on this topic, I want to say that yes, prepositions are super frustrating. They drive us crazy because we don't have clear, defined, fixed rules for when we use them. So it's okay if they're frustrating for you or challenging. But that doesn't mean that you can't learn to use them correctly. You absolutely can. And today's video is one step further in helping you do that. It's really important to understand that the guidelines that we're going to talk about in today's lesson are just that. They are general guidelines. What that means is they are not fixed rules. They are true some of the time, but not all the time. They're great for building a strong foundation and understanding general situations when we must use to or we must use for. But again, this will give you a strong foundation and help you to understand the most common situations when we use one preposition or another. We'll start today with some guidelines on when we use for, and I'll always give you an example or two. Then we'll move on to situations when we need to use to, and I'll end this lesson with two surprisingly simple things that you can do to easily learn these guidelines and use them regularly in your conversations. Okay, number one, with for, we use for when we're talking about the duration or length of time. For example, I've been an English teacher for 20 years. They've lived in this neighborhood for only a month. He's been on the phone for 35 minutes. Number two, when we're talking about scheduling something, an appointment, an event, for a specific date or day. For example, the doctor's office scheduled your next appointment for Tuesday, October 24th. Or the class was rescheduled for Monday. Guideline number three for for is functions. What something does, the purpose of it. For example, I use my telephone for making phone calls and for checking email. Or I use my notebook for taking notes or for keeping track of ideas. Now, let's pause for a moment. If you look at those sentences, something that's useful to know is in those examples, I followed the preposition for with an ing word. So when it's your turn to practice, I want you to make sure that you do that. Guideline number four is when we do something for someone. It might be that we want to help them or we're simply doing something as an act of kindness. For example, wouldn't it be super helpful and kind or awesome if you arrived at work in the morning and your colleague said, "Hey, I know you had a really long day yesterday, so I picked up some coffee for you on the way to work this morning." That would be amazing and really kind. Now, guideline number 5 is a review from that first lesson that I did on this topic. And it's when we're talking about something that is beneficial for you or for your health or for someone. For example, running is helpful for reducing stress. Or eating well is necessary for a healthy lifestyle. And finally, the last one is when we're talking about the reason for something. Now, we're going to return to this in a moment when we look at to, and it's important to know that in this situation, when we're talking about a reason for something, for is always followed by a noun. For example, I studied all weekend for my exam. Or I'm making plans, why? For my trip next summer. Okay, so we've finished with specific situations where we use for. And if you'd like, you can pause this video, take a break, think about what you've learned, or even better, while it's fresh in your mind, look at all of the guidelines we've discussed, look at my examples, and then create your own examples for each situation. And now let's continue with looking at some guidelines for when we use to. Number one is the easiest. We use it for destinations. For example, they're going to Chicago this weekend. The whole team is flying to Baltimore for the conference. Number two, if you remember, we said that we can use for the duration or length of time. But we use to when we want to talk about a specific time or if we're focused on the start to finish. For example, she doesn't work a typical 9-to-5 job. Or could you be here by 8:45? In other words, 8:45. Similarly, we use to when we're talking about the distance between two places, or from one place to another. For example, I love my new neighborhood. It's just 3 blocks from my house to the grocery store. Number 4 is also a review from that first lesson that I shared with you, but it's really important and useful to know, so I want to repeat it here. We use to when we're talking about the transfer of something. For example, something going from me to you or from here to there. This guideline is really easy when you think about verbs such as give, transfer, sell, or send. For example, I transferred money to the account. Or we sent a package to Grandma for her birthday. And finally, our last guideline for today. We said that with the preposition for, we can use it when talking about reasons for something, and it's followed by a noun. For example, I called her. Why? For advice. I called her for advice. We can also use to, but it's followed by a verb. For example, I called her to get some advice. Okay, you made it. You got through all of those guidelines. It is a lot of information. And again, I know that prepositions are crazy difficult. But let's talk about 2 surprisingly simple things that you can do to help you learn these more easily so that you can use them in your daily speaking opportunities. There are 2 things that you need: real life use and repetition. When I say repetition, I don't mean that you learn one thing, repeat it 3 times, and that's it. By repetition, I mean regular, consistent use, day after day. So here's what I want you to do. Choose a few of the guidelines that you learned about in today's lesson and create your own examples. Use your real life, the people that you know, the plans that you made for next month, the deadlines that you have at work. The reason I want you to use your real life is because these are sentences you might really use and need in English, and it will make it so much easier for you. And then number 2, I want you to repeat it. I want you to practice it daily. Of course, you can start practicing today by sharing some examples in the Confident English lesson. You could even read examples from others in the Confident English community and comment on their examples. And then create new examples regularly so that it becomes firm and permanent in your mind, so that when you're speaking English, it just comes to you naturally. You've created a feeling for those guidelines. And with that, thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this lesson, be sure to give it a thumbs up on YouTube or share it on Facebook. That's a fantastic way to let me know that this lesson was helpful to you. Have an awesome Wednesday, and I'll see you next week for your Confident English Wednesday lesson.